It's your Thursday daily delivery podcast. I am Michael Rand. How you guys doing today? Hope you're staying warm. Man, it was cold on Wednesday. If you are in the Twin Cities or anywhere in Minnesota, it was surprisingly cold. Maybe surprising is the wrong word because we have all sorts of things to tell us how cold it is supposed to be. But I did not expect that on Wednesday. But you know what? That's what we signed up for. It is now December. And that's going to be life for the next couple of months at least. And I say couple of months optimistically. Today's show, good one coming up. Marcus Fuller should be with me here in a little bit, talking Gophers men's basketball. Interesting start to the year for them, trying to get things going offensively. Some promising moments from some of their young players, but still trying to figure out the backcourt a little bit too. But see some potential for this team, even if it hasn't come to fruition yet. So I'm curious about where this season is headed, and Marcus certainly does a great job covering them and will help you understand where that team is at heading into the Big Ten opener this weekend against number 5 Purdue. Got to get to a couple NFL things at the end of today's show, including the ongoing beef between Patrick Peterson, Vikings cornerback, and his former teammate, Cardinals quarterback Kyler Murray. Some interesting developments there via a podcast. Not this podcast, of course, a different podcast, a Patrick Peterson podcast, but we'll get to that at the end of the show. Interesting college football development as well that has some Gophers implications in my mind. First, though, what did I miss? We're going to talk Timberwolves at the jump because they continue to be interesting. They beat the Grizzlies 109-101 on Wednesday night, the first full game without Karl-Anthony Towns since the Timberwolves all NBA center was I said all NBA power forward now, since the all NBA big man was lost for several weeks with a calf strain, suffered a couple nights ago against Washington. So the question coming in, I had big questions about this coming in. How would they respond? How would they look? Would they somehow look better even without one of their best players, one of their most important players? Because let's face it, this year it's been clunky in a lot of ways, and part of that I feel like is still the adjustment period to playing two bigs together. Rudy Gobert, of course, acquired in the offseason, and Karl-Anthony Towns playing next to him at the power forward position instead of center. So what was it going to look like, especially with the Wolves missing some other key pieces, right? Jade McDaniels still out for this game with an illness. Taurean Prince still missing. Jordan McLaughlin still missing. Not three of their absolute best players, but three important rotation players. So what was it going to look like? Should we overreact now to how it did look with some pretty good ball movement, some really good defense by and large, forcing 27 Memphis turnovers? And maybe the most important thing, Anthony Edwards looking about as good as he has all season. Is there a direct correlation? Is this just one game? What do we make of this? And here's where I kind of land on it. Yes and yes. It's all of that right now, because here's how ego works in major big-time sports. I think Anthony Edwards at the start of the year didn't know where he fit in on this team anymore, both from a schematic flow perspective, just because things changed with the offense, with the way they were doing things, and also just from a where does he fit in the pecking order situation, because you think about he gets drafted number 1 overall a couple of years ago, comes in, has some success individually. Last season they jump into the playoffs. They've got Towns, of course. They've got D'Angelo Russell last year, but a growing sense that it was becoming at least a share of Anthony Edwards' team, right? This was going to be Anthony Edwards' team. He was the young up-and-comer, still just 21, that he was going to be the face of this franchise going forward, or at least a big part of the face of the franchise going forward. Enter Rudy Gobert. No fault of Rudy Gobert, no fault of the Timberwolves even for wanting to add more good players. That's what good teams do, right? They add good players. They try to improve. They do things that they think are going to make them better. But you bring in someone like a Rudy Gobert, that muddies the picture even more. Is this Rudy Gobert's team now? Is the identity changing? Are they more of a defensive-minded team? Are they going to play big and go that route? Where does Anthony Edwards fit into that? How does he fit into, where does the star pecking order come in? And, Gobert isn't the kind of player that demands the ball, so it wasn't so much of, is he still going to get his shots? It's more of a matter of identity. So you remove Towns, at least temporarily, from that equation. Not a good thing in terms of losing one of your best players, but you clear up some of those pictures, at least for now, to see how that looks. Anthony Edwards has more room on the court because now they're playing a smaller lineup. He's ostensibly, playing, more or less kind of playing the, a bigger role, kind of the, more of a 3-4 almost hybrid with Kyle Anderson out there, because Anderson's not really a big player. So he's playing, really playing the 3 still, but it's a smaller lineup out there where he's got more space, I would say, and more opportunities, just because Karl-Anthony Towns is not going to command the ball. He's not in the game. Also, pecking order-wise, it gets cleared up a little bit because without Cat out there, Edwards suddenly feels empowered again, I would think, to be that guy. And whether he should have felt that all along, whether he did feel that all along and we're making too much of one game, that's a fair question. But I feel like you saw a different Anthony Edwards, especially taking over last night in the fourth quarter with those 17 fourth quarter points, staring down Dillon Brooks, finishing that game, sending Memphis away, Memphis losing its cool a little bit with some ejections towards the end. That felt like it was, an important moment for Anthony Edwards. And by the way, Chris Finch, head coach, also agreed with how well Ant played. Let's hear from him and his reaction post-game.
It could be one of his most complete games he's played since I've been with him. Every facet. He made the big plays. He made the little plays. He played all the way through the game. He really imposed himself offensively and defensively. Gave us great life. Not just the game, but his voice in the locker room is growing and growing. And it's great to see and much needed for this team and for him. He's got it in him. He's an extremely likable teammate. Everyone believes that when you have him on the floor, he's going to do great things, and now he's learning how to back it up with some words to help his teammates as well.
So now we got to say, let's see it again and again and again before we make too many hard conclusions. But for this game, Anthony Edwards looked different. Just both from a production standpoint and from just his energy standpoint. I feel like there's been a little bit of his spirit has been lacking a little bit this season. I felt like we saw some of that in Wednesday's game for one of the rare appearances this season. So let's see it again and again and again before we draw conclusions. If it keeps going, if they keep winning without Towns, then we're going to have some questions about how this all fits back together. Let's not worry about it too much right now. This could have been a one-off. They still got rebounded by like a 2-1 margin. Turnovers and feisty play kind of saved them. That energy, they're going to need to bring that every single night to overcome what they're missing with Towns. But a promising start and an interesting one, especially from the perspective of Anthony Edwards on Wednesday night.
Take a playcation to Mystic Lake. With 24/7 gaming, the good times never have to end. And you can satisfy your cravings at our restaurants and bars. Or relax in one of our luxurious hotel rooms. Those that play together, stay together. And don't forget to join Club M so you can spark new memories and bask in the rewards along the way. Follow the lights to Mystic Lake, where every day is play day.
Let's talk college basketball on Daily Delivery today. Marcus Fuller covers the Gopher men's team for the Star Tribune, does a great job doing it. Marcus, this is stands in contrast a little bit to last year, Ben Johnson's first season, when team got off to an unexpectedly good start. It's been bumpy this year, everything from, Jamison Battle having to come back from an injury early on and missing some time, getting some of these newer players into the mix, a less experienced team in some ways than the one they had last year when they had a lot of those, more experienced transfers that came in for their final year from the portal. Maybe we just start, Marcus, with overall impressions and what we've been seeing so far from this year's team.
Yeah, thanks for having me as always. Awesome to talk Gopher basketball. Feel like this has been a tale of two seasons. They started 4 games at home, and then the last few have been on the road away from home. First road game was Monday at Virginia Tech, true road game, but they did play 2 in California. We're 1-1. The first 4 home games kind of went as expected early. They played some mid-major teams and they handled those teams. The opener was actually pretty shocking that they only won by 1 versus Western Michigan. Again, you mentioned that Jamison Battle was been out. He missed the first 4 games of the season with a foot injury. He had foot surgery in the offseason. It was kind of surprising at the time. I think there was some lingering issues with his foot, and then they decided, hey, if we don't get this done now, then you're going to be trying to play through it during the season and really not and struggling. And so they got that done in October. He made his season debut in the opener in the SoCal Challenge in California, San Juan Capistrano, California. I was there. Great venue, even for a high school gym. And then, there were some Gopher fans there. Pretty decent crowd, about 100 Gopher fans. Some made the trip, some were already there from California. Kind of felt like a home atmosphere to see his first game. And he did okay. He helped them. He actually was the second leading scorer in the game, but they needed a last second shot by Dawson Garcia to pull out a game in overtime versus Cal Baptist. Now, when you think Cal Baptist, you think, are they even a Division I team?
Right.
Which obviously I had to do the research beforehand, and they were a Division II team back 5 years ago. But they did beat Washington this year before they played Minnesota. And, for a young team, as you mentioned, to be able to pull off that game in overtime against an opponent that had already beaten a Power 5 team, I think that showed a lot of guts by them. Pharrell Payne, a freshman from Cottage Grove, he actually led them in scoring and rebounding in that game off the bench, 15 points, 13 rebounds. So, they did it in different ways. They went through their freshmen in the post. Garcia won it for them in the end. And then, Jamison played his first game. And, as much as he means to this team, he's a captain, he was their leading scorer last year. This is an entirely new team.
Sure.
That haven't played with Jamison yet. So there are a lot of things going on in that first game for Jamison. They ended up winning it. They did lose to UNLV in that second game. They were really getting blown out. They were losing by 22 in the second half, and they came back and lost by 9, I believe, or 10. And I think there's just a lot of growth that has to go on with this team. They play 4 freshmen. Battle's only been playing for a few games, and they're still trying to figure out how to utilize Dawson Garcia to the fullest of his ability. And so those are some of the things that you have going on right now. And they have 3 losses.
Yeah. And I'm going to circle back to Battle and Garcia in a minute, but Payne seems like he's been a real bright spot so far, even coming off the bench. His role seems to be expanding, and that's for a big man. Sometimes it takes them a little bit longer to adjust, but he seems like he's been ready from the jump. What have you seen from him so far?
Yeah, I remember Daniel Turu a few years ago. He's a pretty heralded recruit coming out of Cretan-Durham Hall, won a state championship, so people knew a lot about him. I feel like Pharrell, even though he played in Minnesota, not too many people knew him very well. He wasn't a highly rated recruit, until the very end in his senior year when he just blew off the charts and had a great senior year, ended up being, I think, a top 2 recruit locally, or in Minnesota. But nationally, he didn't have the big ranking that Daniel had. Daniel was a top 40 recruit, I think, and he played for Howard Pulley, AAU. Pharrell played for Minnesota Select for a really good coach in Mitch Onstad, a former Gopher. But, they didn't play on the shoe circuit, and he wasn't highly recruited. So I think people didn't know kind of what to expect as a freshman as far as like his immediate impact. but physically, I mean, he's the most impressive freshman that I've covered. I mean,
Wow.
he's 6'9", 255 pounds, and there's no fat on him. I mean, he's super strong, super athletic. You know, I don't want to like obviously blow his expectations out of proportion, but he kind of reminds me of Chris Webber, just
Wow.
physically,
Sure.
physically.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
You know, I mean, he just turned 18 years old, and you don't see too many guys his size as 22-year-olds. You know,
Sure.
you don't see too many 6'9", 255 guys that can jump out of the gym, and he's only 18 years old. So I think physically he fits the part. And you talked about like, hey, you know, he's starting to figure out now, get more comfortable. In the beginning, you know, they really didn't try to do too much for him offensively because he had trouble handling the ball, making decisions. You know, I think he had 5 turnovers in one game early. They lost to DePaul. But, you know, he finishes well at the basket because he's so athletic and so strong. And he's figuring out how to rebound and really help them in that area because they're the worst rebounding team in the Big Ten as a team.
Right.
So I think, you know, he's emerged as that physical presence inside that they sorely need. And they really are gonna have to have that from him as they open the Big Ten season on Sunday versus Purdue, a really surprising Purdue team that's number 5 in the country now after they beat a couple top 10 teams. And, you know, they have a ferociously a scary physical specimen in Zach Edey, 7'4", 290 pounds, and as impressive as Pharrell is physically,
Yeah.
there's no one in the country that matches Edey and his physical stature. So it'll be interesting to see Pharrell and Dawson Garcia, Jamison Battle, you know, those guys, how they handle their first Big Ten opponent. And then it's another road game.
And you talked about Battle and Garcia just now, and that's kind of going into the year. I mean, that was probably the hope that these two could carry a lot of the offensive load. Battle based on what he did last year, and Garcia just based on his pedigree and, you know, coming over in the portal, being very highly regarded. And, you know, it's materialized at times so far this year, but it's been kind of fits and starts just because of Battle's injury and because you still kind of work Garcia into the mix, and he was playing through some illness in that most recent game against Virginia Tech. When and if they do start clicking, that seems like a pretty obvious piece to getting this offense going. Is it that simple in terms of getting those two guys going, or do they need more from other areas too if we're going to see some improvement in these long scoring droughts?
Yeah, you mentioned the long scoring droughts. The past 2 games, past 2 losses, they lost to UNLV and then Virginia Tech in the ACC Big Ten Challenge. The last one, by the way, they're doing away with the Big Ten ACC Challenge. You know,
right?
Rip. I feel like it's been pretty, you know, ho hum for the Gophers as far as their opponents over the years. But I really enjoyed that series in the Big Ten. But yeah, I think the scoring droughts are interesting because you'd figure, like you said, once Battle returned and then you have Garcia and Battle, like that would be such a tandem and an option for the Gophers that they would either have one of them break them out of those scoring droughts. But they both are forwards that rely a lot on their outside shot.
Yeah.
And, you know, understandably, Jamison has still a little rusty. You know, I mean, he's playing only his 3rd game, and he actually only had a couple practices before he played in California. So he's still trying to figure out his shot. And then Dawson, you know, he's more of a finesse big man that really does look for his jumper. So I think when these scoring droughts happen, they happen to play really good defensive teams, and they're just not getting these guys the shots that they want, you know. And when you're not hitting your jumper, you got to get something inside. And I think that's where Pharrell comes in, is I think as they play through him a little bit more in the paint, that'll open things up for Dawson and Jamison. And I think that's something that Ben Johnson and his coaches are trying to figure out now. Is like, okay, we have these 2 dynamic forwards that are very versatile. They can go inside and out, but how do we get them easy baskets? Because that's just not happening in these scoring droughts. And, you know, I think moving forward, you're going to see Jamison Battle get a little bit more comfortable, a lot more comfortable physically. And then Dawson is just going to have to figure out how to play with these other 2 forwards in Farrell and Jamison and get his shots, because I think he's the most dynamic of the three, where, he's 6'11", right?
Sure.
He has a 3-point range. He can finish in the paint. I mean, he's just a matchup problem. And really, the last time that Dawson faced Purdue was last year when he played for North Carolina. He had 26 points versus Zach Edey. And that was because, Edey's not comfortable going all the way out in the perimeter trying to guard 6'11". And, he really had success in that game. So I think, we'll see them utilize Dawson in that way. But I think it'll be pretty interesting to see how they can get Jamison comfortable, because he is one of the better players in the Big Ten. He showed it last year. He was all Big Ten preseason. And I think he's the key to this team if they're going to try to be competitive in the Big Ten.
I'm sure some of it comes down to guard play too. And, they had Peyton Willis, having a surprisingly, maybe to some, good season, and, really pairing with Battle, last season, and giving him kind of some of that 1-2 scoring punch, especially when things were going well. Obviously don't have him anymore. What have we seen from the perimeter at this point, and who might be a candidate to, kind of evolve into a bigger role there?
Yeah, Peyton was just the fact that he came back, played last year. I mean, he's a guy that had already played for Minnesota, right? And transferred away, came back. He had already played Power 5 basketball before he came to Minnesota. He was at Vanderbilt, for 2 years. So, we're looking at a guy that was, a fifth-year player who had already played several years at the high major level. He had so much experience that, you take it for granted, right? I mean, they have Talon Cooper this year at point guard, who is second in the Big Ten in assists, but he's playing high major basketball for the first time. So, when he played DePaul, UNLV was not a high major team, but the way they pressured and their athletes at the guard position, they did have that type of talent. And then you play Virginia Tech, who's a high major program. He struggled in those games, mostly defending the basketball, but also, trying to figure out, okay, I need to get my teammates involved. I'm a very good passer, second in the Big Ten in assists. But when they're going on these offensive shooting slumps, like, oh, wow, they need some offense from me, So I think he figured that out a little bit in the Virginia Tech game. He actually tied them with the scoring lead with Farrell Payne. He had 13, where, okay, they're going to need some scoring from the perimeter at times, when they can't get it from Battle and Dawson. So I think Talon, hopefully the Virginia Tech game, even though it was a loss, he can understand that, he's going to have to score. He's averaging he was averaging just below double figures before that game, about 9 points a game. And that took him over about 10. But he's going to have to be a factor, because they're just going to load it up on Dawson and Jamison. And then as Farrell starts to get more involved, in the paint, they're going to put their pressure on him. And Talon Cooper, Braden Carrington is a freshman that people know from Park Center, won a state championship last year. He was hurt actually to start the year with an ankle injury, but he's been playing, and he's got a lot of confidence. But again, he's going to need the experience. And then Jaden Henley's a freshman as well from California. When I was there in California, got to see his family watching him in the stands. And his good friend is Dennis Evans, a 7-footer from Riverside, California, 5-star recruit that Ben Johnson signed, and got to talk to him a little bit. Great kid. But, I think if you look at this team, I mean, the perimeter is just very young. They have a transfer in Talon Cooper that has no big time experience at the high major level, and then they have freshmen. So I think that's where you see in these losses like DePaul, UNLV, Virginia Tech, is when they're putting on the pressure. I mean, you're going to see mistakes, right? You're going to see a lot of mistakes because the freshmen just haven't handled. The last time, they played a full season was in high school.
Yeah.
And, that there's a big difference between the pressure that you get on the perimeter in high school and then this level, not just when you're playing mid-majors at home, but then when you ratchet up a level in the Big Ten. And, they'll gain from the experience they had early in the season, playing DePaul, playing UNLV, Virginia Tech. But I'm interested to see this Purdue game, because Purdue also relies on freshmen. Their starting point guard is Braden Smith. He's actually one of the better point guards in the league to start off this season in how he's handling Purdue's offense, but he's a freshman, and then they actually start another freshman, Fletcher Lawyer. So their backcourt is 2 freshmen, and then you have Minnesota, who's relying on a couple freshmen. So maybe that helps the Gophers a little bit, that they're seeing a couple other former high school recruits there in the backcourt.
Yeah, you mentioned Purdue, and then maybe that leads to my last thought here for you. I mean, you mentioned Dennis Evans too, which got me thinking about, the future of this team still feels like it's in good shape when you think about, the emergence of someone like Pharrell Payne, when you think about, Dawson Garcia having eligibility, Jamison Battle having eligibility, and, having these recruits coming in, especially Dennis Evans. That said, there's still a season to be played right now, and there's Big Ten feels awfully loaded up again this year, and if Purdue is surprisingly good at number 5, that doesn't help the picture. Where do you how can this team even elevate itself to, middle of the pack is probably even ambitious, but if things are going to go well starting Sunday when they do play Purdue, how do you see that evolving if things are going to go well in a very loaded Big Ten?
Yeah, you have to be realistic, right? You mentioned middle of the pack. I think right now you just do not want to finish at the bottom.
Yes.
Like they're better than that. They have more talent than last year. They have less experience, but they have more talent. So the goal is not to finish better than last year. And they should be able to do that if those younger players can learn from their mistakes quicker, sooner than later. They've played, he's starting Jaden Henley as a freshman. He's playing, Braden Carrington's playing heavy minutes. Pharrell Payne's playing heavy minutes. They also have another freshman in Joshua Ola Joseph who's in the rotation. So they have 4 freshmen in their rotation. Those freshmen have to, at some point in Big Ten play, not look like freshmen and look more like sophomores who are going to make a jump. Usually you wait until next year to say, oh, wow, this guy's really learned from his freshman year. But they have to learn from their freshman year within their freshman year.
Right.
And there's no way around it. They just don't have enough depth to say, oh, wow, these freshman players are struggling. We can go somewhere else. They don't have anywhere else to go. So I think, yes, Jamison Battle and Dawson Garcia, that tandem right there at some point has to look like one of the better forward tandems in the Big Ten. But even those 2 playing well cannot overcome the fact that they just rely so much on youth. So I think, it's not going to be Purdue. It's their first Big Ten game. It's on the road. If they're competitive in that game, that's going to be a big win for them. But, at some point, playing at home, Michigan is their second Big Ten game. It might not even come in that game. But, once the thick of the Big Ten schedule comes in January, you're going to have to see some growth from the freshmen. Pharrell's starting to show it a little bit, but you're going to have to see it from some of the guards. When they start improving and making drastic improvement, then they can really step out of that last, few teams in the Big Ten shadow, which I think right now it's kind of hard to say that they're not, because they've lost 3 games in November, which I look back, and the last time they lost 3 games this early in the season was back in 2019, and then it's only happened twice in the last 16 years.
Wow.
So this year and in 2019 under Pitino, and that year they lost 3 games because they played 3 games away from home. DePaul, they played Butler, and they lost to Oklahoma. So I think this team is better than the 3 losses they have, but you need to figure out how to play with Battle now he's back. And then again, like I said, the freshmen have to at some point not play like freshmen.
That's a big ask for this team, but I think you're setting your expectations correctly, and that you want to see growth at least, and that's what I'll be watching for this year, especially like you said, once they get into the heart of Big Ten play in January. I'm sure we'll be talking a lot more about that as the season goes along. Marcus, appreciate your perspectives as always. Follow Marcus's coverage, of course, Star Tribune and StarTribune.com. And Marcus, we'll talk again soon.
All right. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Great stuff from Marcus. As always, loved catching up with him. It's been a little bit too long since we did that, but it shouldn't be as long before we talk again. Some important games coming up for the Gophers. Curious to see if they can kind of find that offensive rhythm that they want, find some of that perimeter scoring, get those forwards going, and get some momentum going this season, and really turn that program around. We will see if they are able to do that. Let's finish with a couple of extended NFL thoughts and one college football item. NFL, Aaron Rodgers says he's open to the idea of sitting the rest of the season if and when the Packers are eliminated from any sort of playoff possibility. They're kind of hanging by a thread right now. They're 4-8. Rodgers dealing with the thumb injury still, dealing with a rib injury that he picked up last game in that loss to the Eagles. An interesting spot for the Packers to be in because Aaron Rodgers, obviously back-to-back MVPs the last 2 seasons, but Jordan Love kind of waiting in the wings. They probably want to see what he looks like before they make any decisions about his future, give him a look, maybe at least increase his value if he's going to stay or go. So fascinating to watch how that plays out in Green Bay the rest of the year, because that will tell you a lot about what is going to happen in Green Bay in 2023 and beyond. Patrick Peterson talking on his podcast with co-host, former NFL corner Bryant McFadden, talking about his former teammate Kyler Murray, saying Kyler Murray don't care about nobody but Kyler Murray. That's just a matter of the fact. A few hours after the podcast posted, Kyler Murray wrote on Twitter, this isn't true, writing right at Patrick Peterson, at P2, that's Patrick Peterson's Twitter handle. You got my number. If you really feel like this is a big bro or mentor, you're supposed to call me and tell me, not drag me, so your podcast can grow. Love it. Love the beef. Love the NFL back and forth. If you remember a couple months ago when the Vikings played the Cardinals, Patrick Peterson did a video game celebration in after a big defensive play, mocking Kyler Murray. So that I'm sure that relationship could use a little bit of growing, a little bit of mentoring, and maybe those guys will smooth it out. But I don't know if the relationship between Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury can be quite as smoothed out as that one. Let's finish up with the cooler. Like I said, college football news. Sounds like the Rose Bowl is getting on board with the idea of a 12-team college football playoff starting in 2024. Why is that a big deal? 12 teams all of a sudden makes it far more attainable for a lot of the next tier of programs, and I would put the Gophers into that mix. Not every year, but every few years, I feel like a team like the Gophers could be in the top 12 far more easily, far more attainable than being in a top 4 where you're competing with all of the elites of the elite. So watch for that starting in 2024, a more realistic path to a college football playoff for a program like Minnesota starting that year and beyond. That will do it for me today. Should be a good one coming up on Friday. Ben Gessling expected to join me to talk some Vikings. Until then, have a great rest of your Thursday. Be back at it again tomorrow.